everybody. Welcome to Odd and Untold, the podcast where we talk about all things strange and spooky. And this week, I'm going to be talking about some more Bigfoot encounters in New Jersey. And we're talking about Suffolk County, New Jersey this week, and there's a reason for that. The lovely Rebecca and I went to yet another Renaissance fair recently. We tend to do that a lot. Lest you think hosting a paranormal podcast is the nerdiest thing I do, far from it. We go to a lot of Ren Fairs. We dress up, lots of huzzah and stuff like that. So we went to this other fair, the Sparta Ren Fair in Sparta, New Jersey, and really cool fair. It's smaller, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. The crowd's size, the crowd size was perfect, and it's in a more wooded area, which is really nice. It really gives you that feeling that you're in this like enchanted forest, and there's little buildings and outcroppings and vendors and people in costume, and it's really great. Not to knock the New York Ren Fair or the Pennsylvania Ren Fair or any of the other Ren Fairs that we've been to, where they're a little bit more almost like a medieval town with actual roads and buildings. This is more rustic, and we really dug it. And I just wanted to do some Bigfoot sightings in this area, as I do anytime I go to a new area. I look at the sightings in the area, and sometimes there are none. And when I pulled up Suffolk, there were, on the BFRO website alone, there were 18 different Bigfoot sightings, encounters for Suffolk County. And again, sometimes I look at a county and there's none, or there's one, or there's two. So this may have to be a two-part episode. I'm not going to get to all the stories this week, but we are going back to the Sparta Ren Fair, so that might be a good time to do another episode on Bigfoot in Suffolk County. So yeah, if you guys like Ren Fairs, Sparta in New Jersey, if you're on the East Coast here, the Northeast, Sparta, New Jersey is great. Like I said, it's a little smaller, a little bit more rustic. The stages are outdoors. They have a tavern. It's just really cool. Like I said, it's mainly in the woods. It was an old summer camp that the owner had purchased. So little trails through the woods, and it just has a really cool feel to it. And each Ren Fair is different, like I said, but we really dug this one. So hence me wanting to plug them a little bit and do some Bigfoot sightings in the area, because it is, a little rustic out there, and apparently there's a lot of Bigfoot sightings. So let's get into some of them right now. Okay, so the first sighting I want to talk about, the witness was a young girl. Looks like she was about 8 years old at the time. And I'll get into my thoughts on children and seeing these things after this, but I just want to read the report first. So this is a possible daylight sighting by a young girl catching frogs at Pleasant Acres Campground. And this happened in August of 2014. So about 10 years ago. Again, Sussex County. Location details: it's a big campground with lots of animals. There's a petting zoo on the grounds. Nearest town is Sparta, New Jersey, where the Ren Fair is. Nearest road, Pleasant Acres Campground. Observed. So again, remember, this is a 9-year-old girl, 8-year-old when she first saw this. I was camping with my family and went frog catching at a tiny lake with my friends. There was a lot of trees and tall grass around the lake area. All of a sudden, I hear a branch being snapped or broken. I looked back, and there was a large brown hairy figure with long drooping arms and a smaller figure next to it. My friend also heard the sound but did not look back. There was a horrible smell, and one of them made a really loud scream, nothing like I ever heard. I was able to see the face of both. Their eyes were yellowish, and they had a very large foreheads, and their hair was about 5 inches and very dirty, knotty. The tall one grunted as it left, and the smaller one let out a scream. Then they took a really long step and were gone. I never went back to that area again. I tried to tell my friend's dad, who was with us, and he didn't believe me, but I know what I saw and heard. Also noticed, my granddaughter saw this incident with her friend. Katie is now 9 years old and does not have a vivid imagination. If she saw this, she saw this. She was very upset by what she saw, but has now gotten very excited. Other witnesses, her friend was there. Other stories on Google and BFRO and the episodes. Again, they're talking about finding Bigfoot. Time and conditions: it was early afternoon, very sunny skies, were clear, wooded mountain area. So let me just read the follow-up investigation report by BFRO investigator Paul Conroy. He says, I interviewed the witness and her grandmother for 25 minutes and performed a follow-up interview with her grandmother the following week. Based on conversations that she had with her granddaughter, the grandmother of the witness estimated the heights of the creatures observed as one being between 6.5 to 7 feet, and the taller one at approximately 8.5 feet. She estimated that her granddaughter had observed the creatures from an approximate distance of 50 feet. She described her granddaughter as being extremely level headed for her age and not one to exaggerate or make up stories, stating, if that's what she says she saw, then that's what she saw. It was noted that the smaller of the two held a rock in its hand. The witness described them as having wide shoulders and long arms. She remarked that they looked angry. Many farm animals are on the grounds, including small horses, goats, pigs, chickens, and ducks. High Point State Park is close by. Okay, so this one is interesting to me for a couple of reasons. I mean, one, it's a clear daylight sighting. Uh, these things are standing up. They have long arms. There's two of them. This was seen, I mean, it was reported by a 9-year-old girl, but this happened when she was 8. So this was reported and submitted in June of 2015, but she had seen this in August of 2014. So I'm guessing she was around 8 when she saw this. And kids can be very good witnesses and they can also be very bad witnesses because sometimes their brains can't figure things out. But at the same time, sometimes their experiences and their perception of things can be just so pure. They're not the Bigfoot hunter in the woods with Bigfoot on the brain, and then every little snapped twig is, oh, there's a Bigfoot and there's a tree stump, and now that must be Bigfoot. She doesn't even say Bigfoot. She just says she sees a figure with long arms, drooping arms, and a smaller figure next to it. Could she have been mistaken? Of course. She doesn't use the word Bigfoot, which I find interesting. When my son was younger, he was very much into this paranormal stuff. I don't know where he got that from. But if he had seen something, he would have said, I saw Bigfoot. He's not going to say, I saw a figure. I saw a creature. He's going to say, I saw Bigfoot because he was familiar with those terms. There's things in here that, again, kind of tick the boxes. There was a horrible smell, and one of them made a really loud scream. So now you have the distinctive, bad odor that a lot of Bigfoot are reported to have. The loud scream. Again, we've all heard, Bigfoot howls. One of them was holding a rock. We hear about tree knocks. We hear about them throwing rocks. So there's a lot to digest here because on the one hand, it's an 8-year-old. If she is actually the witness, if this isn't the grandmother just making it up, it's a lot of detail, which can be good. But my skeptical radar goes up a little bit because there's just a little too much in here that kind of ticks off the boxes of like, it wasn't just one creature, it was two, and one was bigger than the other. So you kind of have that, stereotypical juvenile Bigfoot in there. One of them's holding a rock. They scream and howl. They smell. All it's missing is that one of them had a branch in its hand and was, doing tree knocks. So there's a lot of these sort of stereotypical Bigfoot things in this story that doesn't necessarily make it untrue. It's just you add all of that, plus it was a child. It just makes me wonder. And the grandmother, while submitting this, says BFRO episodes. So does she watch Finding Bigfoot with her granddaughter? So did her granddaughter have Bigfoot on the brain? Did she just see something in the woods? Did she imagine this? Did she misidentify something? Hard to say. The follow-up investigation with the grandmother, she's saying this kid is not someone prone to making things up. And we all have kids like that in our lives. Some of them are storytellers and they see all sorts of things. And then there's other children who never embellish, never make stories up. Again, all we have is her story to go by. But I did just want to sort of talk about the pros and cons of this, because again, I think in many ways children can be just so pure in what they're saying, especially at that age. They're old enough not to have imaginary friends, but they're not really the snarky teenagers who are kind of making stuff up just to, tease the adults. Kind of in that sweet spot where they're still kind of nice children. On the other hand, there's a lot here that just makes me a little suspicious. It's a little too good to be true, again, with the smell and with the howling and the grunting and the rock in its hand. And I don't know. So I think a good story. It's definitely worth mentioning and talking about. But I'm not sure on which side of the fence I feel about this one. So let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Is this a true story? Is this just a kid embellishing? Is it grandma just throwing extra details in there so that someone would pay attention? Who knows? So let us move on to our story number two. All right, story number two. This one is interesting to me because multiple witnesses. A trio remember observing a tall biped figure by a golf course in Vernon. This happened in October of 1998, Sussex County. Location details: Route 94 to Great Gorge Resort condos. Nearest town is Vernon. Nearest road is Route 94. And this is what they say they saw, observed. We were at Oktoberfest in October 1998 at Great Gorge in Vernon, New Jersey. We were out on the back deck, which borders the mountains and the golf course. My brother-in-law and sister were with me. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw an approximately 7.5 to 8 foot large figure that walked with a long, steady gait, with long arms and a thick chest. It walked steadily down the mountainside, glancing at us and continuing to walk. We all looked at each other before running inside. We all saw the exact same thing. 3 witnesses: we had returned from a barbecue and were smoking a cigarette outside. Other stories: not before watching Finding Bigfoot, then realized we were not crazy or alone. So there must have been an episode on this area of New Jersey. I don't recall. I mean, there was many seasons of that show, and I didn't watch it religiously. Time and conditions: approximately 8 p.m. It was cold, damp evening. Environment was a mountainous valley. The follow-up investigation by BFRO investigator Larry Rippon. He says, I spoke to the witness over the phone, and I met him and his brother-in-law at the Northern New Jersey Town Hall meeting held in Newton, New Jersey in June of 2014. I'm guessing that's a town hall for Finding Bigfoot. After returning from an Oktoberfest barbecue, the witness was with his sister and brother-in-law on the ground level backyard deck of their condo smoking a cigarette when out of the corner of his eye, he observed a large, tall figure with a massive chest and long arms which hung by the creature's knees. The creature walked smoothly from right to left, glancing at them in stride as it continued down the sloped backyard until it reached a 4-foot wooden fence, which it climbed over. On the other side of the fence is a wooded ravine, which leads to a golf course. According to the witness, there was just enough daylight for them to conclude that there was no doubt in their minds that they saw a Bigfoot. The creature came from the direction of the Hamburg Mountain Wildlife Management Area, which is a 3,000-acre area of swamps, unmarked hiking trails, roads, and is prevalent with black bear, deer, and coyotes. The witness's brother-in-law agreed with the account as it was told by the witness. I was unable to interview the third witness as well. So I like this story. Again, you have multiple witnesses, 2 of whom are interviewed in the follow-up investigation. 3 of them are seeing this creature. It's walking upright. It's almost 8 feet tall or close to 8 feet tall, thick chest, the steady gait. And that is something we do hear a lot in Bigfoot sightings. You know, it's human beings walking up or down a hill. We're a little clumsy. We're not used to that. I mean, we can handle stairs, but you get mountainous terrain, hills, rocks, roots. We're very clumsy, and we don't walk very steadily. And you hear a lot of this in these Bigfoot reports where they say it was just almost gliding, you know, just like with no effort. So I always think it's funny when skeptics say it was a man in a costume, or it's a ghillie suit, or it's a bear. None of these things, no human being in a monkey suit or a ghillie suit is going to walk steadily up or down a mountain or a hill. It walked steadily down the mountainside, glancing at us and continuing to walk. That reminds me of Patty from the Patterson-Gimlin footage, just turning and looking at Patterson and Gimlin as it walked away, like acknowledging them and saying, yeah, I see you, but I'm going this way. So again, very interesting. It steps over a fence, goes into the woods, and is gone. You know, it was 8 p.m. It says there was enough daylight, so they weren't mistaken. So again, there's not too much wiggle room here. Either they saw Bigfoot, they saw a man in a costume, which I don't believe, or they're lying. This couldn't have been a bear. Again, bears don't walk on 2 legs for any length of time, a step or 2, maybe, if that. They're not going to walk and then step over a fence with their stubby little hind legs. So are they lying? Did they really see something? Again, I tend to believe that they saw something. They were at Oktoberfest. Were they drinking? Probably. I mean, you go to Oktoberfest, you're going to have a beer or three. Um, that being said, as I've said on the show many, many times before, you have to be ridiculously drunk to hallucinate a Bigfoot and to have multiple people see the same thing. This is not people who are drunk. They came back from a barbecue, they're outside smoking, and they see this creature. So very cool. I always like these clearer sightings. It's not a tree knock. It's not just a howl in the woods. It's a very clear sighting. And again, it's either Bigfoot or they're lying. I mean, it's one of the two. I don't, not that they're probably lying, but it's either a Bigfoot or they lied. So what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. And let's move on to story number 3. Okay, so our third story is another clear sort of daytime sighting. This is from summer of 2015, September 20th. Sussex County. Location details. It was at a very big turnaround point, which was very steep on the way up. Nearest town is Walpack. Nearest road is Tillman Road. Witness has daytime sighting while four-wheeling near Flat Brook. Observed. My family and I pulled into a huge turnaround at Stokes State Forest off of Layton Road. We stepped out of the Jeep as we had to tinkle. When I got back to my car, I noticed someone standing behind the very high brush, 7 to 8 feet tall at least, because I could see its complete head over the bushes. It just stood there watching us. Reddish-brown, orangutan-colored hair covered its head. It was very human-like, and I could tell it was standing upright. I blinked a million times to try to really focus as much as I could, paying attention to detail. I couldn't make out the face for certain, as it was covered in hair. When we started to drive, it immediately took off in the opposite direction as to not confront us. It seemed to be frightened. At this point, I said out loud, "What the heck was that?" Probably not so cleanly. Before I could describe what I had seen, my 14-year-old son beat me to it. He said, "Mom, you mean that reddish-brown haired creature behind those bushes?" I couldn't believe it. I was so glad I wasn't the only one who had seen this thing, because it's definitely a shock to the eyes. Other witnesses, my son and I were both sitting in our Jeep at the time we saw it. We didn't realize we saw the same thing until we drove off. Other stories, no time and conditions. It was about 1:30 to 2 p.m. in the afternoon, and it was a very beautiful, clear day. The environment, usual turnaround areas are gravel covered or meadow like, but this one had 2 separate dirt roads and it was a pretty steep on the way up. So the follow-up investigation was done by Larry Rippon again. He says, I spoke with the witness on the phone several times. I also visited the location of the sighting, which is near Walpack Township, with fellow BFRO researchers Scott Osborne and Benjamin Christian. The witness described seeing a tall, upright, man-like figure with orange-colored hair on its face and head standing in the brush in front of them as they drove up a steep turnaround. The location is very near streams that are stocked with trout and is in the same vicinity as a documented incident at a Stokes State Forest camp location, strange screams in the middle of the night, where the local authorities who were called stated they received several calls for Bigfoot activity on the very same night as the campsite incident. So this is an interesting one. Mother and her son in their Jeep come up on this thing. They go to, pee in the woods. And I think it's interesting how she writes this report. She says, I noticed someone standing behind the very high brush. Not I noticed something, not I noticed Bigfoot. I noticed someone. So that tells me that she at first thought this was a person. And I always try to pay attention to how people phrase things. I think we get so caught up in the overall bigger picture here that we don't pay attention to smaller details. But I always try to pay attention to how people phrase things. Again, just like the little girl in the first story where she says figures. She doesn't say I saw Bigfoot. She doesn't say I saw an ape man. She saw a figure. So this, where she says, I noticed someone, like a person, and then it kind of dawns on her that it had to be 7 to 8 feet tall because it was completely over the bushes. And then it's staring at them and she can see this reddish brown hair, very human-like, and it was standing upright. And she's saying here, she's blinking, she's trying to convince herself that I'm not seeing what I think I'm seeing. This can't be what I'm seeing. The face is covered in hair, which that's a detail I would like to dive down a little bit more onto, because was the face hairy or was the face covered in the hair? Because a lot of people, when they see Bigfoot, they say the face didn't have hair on it, but there could be hair elsewhere or, on the jowls, on the chin, kind of like a beard, but that usually around the eyes, the nose, the mouth, that is usually hairless. But her son sees it too. So again, you have a daytime sighting, a very clear sighting. This is either Bigfoot, a man in a costume, or they are lying. There's really no other possibility here. She didn't see a bear because she's seeing the face. This thing is standing upright. It's 7 to 8 feet tall. Here on the East Coast, we don't have grizzlies. I mean, we have black bear, and when they stand up, 6 feet tall, maybe. They can get a little bigger than that, but they're not going to be 8 feet tall. They're not going to look like they have a human face, and they're not going to just walk away when you drive off. So very interesting sighting. I think, again, there's no wiggle room here. Not a bear. So what do you guys think of this one? I like sightings like this because it's very clear one way or the other. It's not a tree knock. It's not a howl. Like I said, I don't really like those stories unless there's something else to them. But this is very clearly she saw something. Okay, so our fourth story, campers have possible encounter while staying in High Point State Park. This is also from 2015, June 23rd. Location details. If you drive into High Point State Park, past the left turn and sign that says Park Ridge, I believe, and keep driving all the way to Main Lake, keep passing campsites until you reach campsite number 19. When you get to the campsite, there is a path leading to the lake. Go down it, turn right, and keep going until you see another campsite that is right on the lake's edge. Nearest town is Montague. Nearest road is Sawmill Road. And observed. This is a long one, so just bear with me. My brother and I camped overnight in High Point State Park, New Jersey, the other night. Driving around the park, the camping sites were labeled with numbers. We wanted to set up in a place as far away as we could from the other people. I myself have known the existence of Sasquatch to be real for quite some time. Not from a personal experience, which was yet to come, but because of watching so many people tell their stories of encounters and just seeing the genuine fright and truthfulness in their eyes when they tell their stories. My brother, however, always laughed at the subject of Bigfoot and was a complete skeptic. So my brother and I had set up camp on the edge of what I'm assuming was the only lake in the park. We walked through the forest in the daytime and indeed found many peculiar structures and tree breaks I had seen before on Bigfoot TV shows. As night fell, we made a fire and watched the numerous stars reveal themselves as the night got darker. Around 12 o'clock at night, I went over to a rock right by the edge of the lake and looked up at the stars while my brother tended to the fire. I'm an astronomy fan, so before I knew it, I had been sitting there for 2 hours when I checked my phone and it said it was nearing 2 in the morning. Just then, my phone ran out of battery. While sitting on the rock, I began to feel a weird sensation that someone or something was watching me. I checked to see if it was my brother, but he was staring into the fire. I dismissed this feeling and told myself I had just brought it on myself. I looked back up at the stars and got lost in some train of thought when all of a sudden something made a very loud noise that could only be described as a very large man exhaling aggressively towards me. I jumped up and ran to my brother, and we heard the thing walk towards the forest, all the while breaking branches and continuing to make the same aggressive noise I heard so close to me. It got quiet, and my brother and I were standing, looking in the direction where all the noise had come from, when it made the noise again. Now, I don't speak Sasquatch, but that thing was telling us to get the heck out of there. I don't get scared easily at all, and I was shaking like I had never before. I felt so much negative energy and decided I was too scared to stay outside, so we went to the car and sat inside, praying whatever made that noise didn't come back. My brother described the sound as sounding like someone ripping a tent. Whatever the noise was, absolutely no common animal could have made it. After a sleepless night, when it got light out again around 5:30, we built up the courage to go back where we heard the noise to see if there were any indications of what made it. And when we got there, I was shocked. There was a makeshift bed made from giant leaves that was fit for a very large creature. I could see the exact spot where the thing that had made the noise was watching me and where it walked away, as there was a clear path of flattened grass and plants leading up the forest. The area was wet and muddy, and indeed there were footprints. But as I was taking pictures of the path leading from the bed to the upper forest, it happened again. The thing made the same exact noise. This time it was so close I nearly fell. We ran back to our campsite and listened, but nothing made a sound. We stayed there for about 30 minutes until I decided to go back and see if there were fresh prints or anything I could take back as proof. I took more pictures, and I was standing on the trail leading back to our campsite looking at the pictures I had taken when again the thing made the same noise. This time it was on the side of me that I would have to run past to get back to the campsite. As soon as I heard it, it felt like my heart literally dropped and my legs became wobbly, but I summed up my courage and once again ran back to the campsite in fear. It was only about 10 seconds away, and when I got there, my brother was standing there wide-eyed asking if I had heard the noise. Whatever it was, I was not happy, and we heard it walk up into the forest, breaking branches and exhaling aggressively as it headed deeper into the forest. At this point, my brother wanted to get the heck out of there, but I needed to see it. I went up the road right before the forest, where we had heard it go in, and looked around, but saw nothing. I was so confused on how the heck it ever got so close to me without me seeing or hearing it walk at all. While I was walking on the road, I saw my brother walk up to the campsite looking around. When he spotted me, he sighed in relief and told me he thought I was getting attacked because he heard a bunch of human-like screams coming from the forest. I walked towards where he was and started to hear them too, but by the time I reached him, the screams started to sound like some kind of weird chatter. My brother, the skeptic, was so scared he told me we were packing up and leaving right away. I have no doubt in my mind that we just happened to pick a campsite right next to where a Sasquatch was sleeping, and he was just not happy about that. I know what we heard was a Sasquatch. My brother entered a skeptic, but left a full believer in Bigfoot. Also noticed the bed, large footprints, a path where something recently walked, and the aggressive noises we heard. Two witnesses, just him and his brother. He had heard of Sasquatch being spotted in High Point State Park, but I have never heard of anything exactly like what happened to us. First encounter was about 2 a.m., then about 5:45, then again at 6:15 a.m. So this is a follow-up investigation by BFRO researcher Mike Famelon, and he was on our show once before. I'll link to that in the description below, but I interviewed him early on in the days of this podcast. Really cool guy, very nice guy. We had an awesome discussion, so check out that interview as well. Like I said, I'll link to it below. So Mike says, after reading this report, I went to the area the next day, which was June 26th, 2015. I had not spoken with the witness at that point. No abnormal findings were noted. I spoke with the witness over the phone at length on 6/29/15 regarding his encounter. I believe the witness to be true with his description of the encounter. Justin, who is 17, and his brother, 20, stealth camped at a site in the Sawmill Campground in the High Point State Forest. Shortly after arriving around 5 p.m., they decided to go on a hike on one of the trails near camp. Justin began to see signs of tree manipulations and other structures, such as large upside-down trees that were jammed into the ground not far off the trail they were on. His brother, being a skeptic, dismissed these as natural happenings. However, it is documented that these structures are attributed to possible Sasquatch that is or has been in the area. I have documented personally multiple from High Point and other surrounding areas. As night falls, they are just hanging out. Around 2 a.m., Justin is sitting on a rock by the lake and his brother near the campfire. Justin starts an overwhelming feeling of being watched. He tries to brush it off as nothing when approximately 20 feet to his right, he heard what sounded like bipedal footfalls. After a few steps, he heard what he describes as a loud exhale, which happened twice in a row. His brother later that night described it as a tent ripping, and although Justin could relate to that description, he said it sounded louder and human-like. Both brothers hurried back to the nearby car and spent a sleepless night in the vehicle. At first light, around 5:30 a.m., Justin walked back into the area of the sound. He found what he described as a bed, which after viewing his photo is a moderate-sized circle area, which was mostly skunk cabbage matted down. He described a freshly made trail extending from it into the forest. From the looks of the photographs, this was fairly new, as all the vegetation was alive and not fully matted down. As he was photographing the area, the noise in which he heard last night was heard again, this time at about 10 feet. Justin had wanted to see what made the sound, so after a quick regrouping at the vehicle, he and his brother went off in the directions of the sound. As they got into the same area, the noise was heard again, this time followed by obvious bipedal footfalls and other branches breaking off trees. The object which made the sounds or movement was not visible. However, it did leave behind possible footprints, which were photographed. They stayed in the area looking around for another half hour, then headed back towards their home as his brother had a flight to catch. Justin describes himself as a moderate outdoorsman. Even though he does not camp often, he routinely hikes. High Point State Park is very popular for camping that time of year. On the night of their encounter, they saw approximately 30 other campers in the area. High Point State Park is home to many black bear. I sent the witness a link with different bear vocalizations. He stated that a few sounded familiar, but they were still off from what he heard. It looks like at one point there were photos here, and I tried to load the images, but they're gone. I guess the server they were on is just not there anymore. So, a review of this sighting, multiple possible vocalizations at different times of the night, early morning. As per the witness, vocalizations were unusual and similar, but not the same to bears, which are known to inhabit the area. Witness describes bipedal running through the woods with branches breaking at close range at night without noticing any flashlights or people in the area. Possible partial print was photographed, however, not documented appropriately. So from that one, I'm guessing there was no object in the photo for size comparison. So you're taking a picture of a print. If you don't have anything to compare it to, was that footprint 6 inches long or is it 16 inches long? That makes a difference. So this story I have some issues with, and no offense to my friend Mike, who's a great guy and a good researcher. But this one, I'm not throwing this one out, but there are certain things about this one that bother me. He goes in, he's a believer in Bigfoot. He's saying he knows 100% that Bigfoot exists because of people who've told their stories before. And I can relate to that. I am open to Bigfoot. I think there's something to it because of so many people like these witnesses and other witnesses I've had on the show who have seen something. They've, clearly seen something in the woods. They've seen an upright, hairy, man-like creature walking uphill or crossing in front of their car, where it's a very clear sighting. They saw something, or they're lying, or all these people are lying, or they saw something that looked like what we think of as Bigfoot. And maybe they're wrong, but I can't imagine that many people are seeing a bear or a moose and are just imagining Bigfoot. It doesn't make sense. So I relate to that, where I'm open to the possibility of Bigfoot, and I believe many of these people are seeing these things. That being said, he's going in and seeing, structures, and that's another thing. Scott and I did a show about these things. Is it Bigfoot or not? Are these Bigfoot characteristics? We talked about tree knocks. We talked about structures, and I just don't buy the whole structure thing or tree breaks as being Bigfoot. I think there are certain ones that are suspect. There are certain things that you can look at and say, what did that? If you have a bunch of trees in the same area where branches are broken off at the same height and it's all about 9 or 10 feet, yeah, could that have been snow load? Could that have been just nature? Possibly, but what are the chances that all the branches just at that height are breaking, not below it, not above it, just at that particular height are being broken? Could it be people? Yes. They say they know that there's been sightings in High Point State Park. So could there be people in there building these structures, trying to hoax people? Of course. Could there be people turning these trees upside down and doing the branch breaks and we're going to goof on people? Of course. So my thing is, unless you're seeing the Bigfoot do these things, you can't say Bigfoot definitely did this. Bigfoot definitely made this tree structure. Bigfoot definitely broke this tree branch. How do you know? It's just silly to say I know that for sure. So that bothers me a little bit. There are black bear there, and they didn't see anything, and that's kind of where, when you're hearing something and something is growling, I don't really like the sounds because, especially, and I was with this guy until the end of the story where he's saying, yeah, it kind of sounds like those bear calls, but not quite. And when you hear sounds online from animals, it's never going to be the same exact sound. Sometimes it can be with birds or things like that. But if you're listening to a bear, I mean, there's going to be so many different variations on that sound. And for him to say, yeah, it sounded kind of like those bear sounds, but not exactly, but close, that to me tells me that maybe it was a bear. Could have been a territorial bear. And I've had black bear come into the camp. I mean, even at Bantam Lake, and there's tons of campers there, and it's not deep in the woods. But when that bear is walking around camp, it's, that you're going to hear that exhaling because they're big and they have big lungs. And I just, for this one, he didn't see anything. He's saying he got pictures of footprints, but even Mike Famelant here, the follow-up investigator, is saying, the photographs were not done properly. So there's no way to tell size. So was this a real Bigfoot encounter, or was this maybe an angry bear and two guys who are fairly young, 17 and 20. One of them fully believes in Bigfoot, may have had Bigfoot on the brain, and is hearing, something big tramp around him and grunting at him. And oh my God, it's Bigfoot. I don't know. But this one, I'm saying this is very possibly a bear, especially because the witness himself says that the grunts and the noises that it makes sounded very similar to the bear sounds that Mike Famelant sent them. So I'm going to call this one a bear, guys. What do you guys think? Leave your comments below. But yeah, this one I'm saying is a bear. Okay, so our final story for tonight. This one comes to us from May of 2006. Possible screams heard by fishermen near Lake Hopatcong. And now, before I go any further, you may be asking yourself or asking me, hey, Jay, you just said you don't like these stories with screams and howls and tree knocks. So why do you cover them? I cover them basically for the very reason that we just talked about in the last story. I don't want to just cover stories that are clearly like weird. And this is either Bigfoot or a lie. There's no wiggle room. I also wanted to show stories where I can either fully debunk it or at least have a discussion about what it could have been. Because that's where we all need to be. That's where science comes in. That's where the truth comes out. We can't just accept every single story as, oh my God, that was Bigfoot, 100%. Oh my God, that was also Bigfoot, 100%. There are certain stories that are going to be really impressive, and even skeptics would be hard pressed to say what this was, if not Bigfoot, or a lie. It's either the person completely making it up or it's actually Bigfoot. There's no mistaking it because what they're reporting is very clear. These stories are a little bit more vague, a lot more gray areas here. So I like to showcase some of these stories because I think even the screams and the howls and the tree knocks, they have their place in Bigfoot research. I think we give it way too much credence and importance, and people want to really focus on tree knocks and things like that. I don't, but they should be part of the conversation. And two, on my show, this is my show, I don't want to just showcase the good stuff, the convincing stuff. I also want to show how certain things may appear to be Bigfoot, but when you really start breaking it down, maybe not. So it's all about critical thinking. It's all about questioning everything. You got to question it. Doesn't mean I don't believe these people. It's not that I'm saying these people are liars. I'm just saying we have to question these things because misidentifications can happen and people could be in the woods at night and get scared, and a bear can seem like a Bigfoot. So we just have to be very careful. So that's why I'm doing another story on screams. So let us move on to this one. Nearest town in Sussex County is Northwood Andover Hopatcong, which is, again, very near where the Ren Faire is. We kind of go past Lake Hopatcong. Nearest road is Maxim Drive, and observed. My friend and I wanted to go fishing at Bear Pond, so we left my house at about 6 p.m. We went topwater fishing because of the approaching sunset. We went in a canoe and fished along the edge of the entire pond. It started to get too dark to cast accurately, considering all the trees along the edge overhanging the water. We decided to start heading to the docking area to go home. By now it was completely dark, and there are no houses in the back part of the pond, just woods and rivers and some pretty steep hills that go on forever. We were at a complete stop in the canoe between the mainland and an island when all of a sudden we both heard a loud scream coming from the mainland up on a hill. It sounded like a mix between a young girl screaming and a weird bird-like sound. We both looked at each other and said, "What the hell was that?" Again, it happened, and again. Just as the sound stopped, something started to run in the mainland woods about 50 yards from us. The sound was very like crashing and running. Something was watching us very quietly because we had passed that area along the edge of the water about 20 minutes earlier. Anyway, this thing was definitely on two legs, running towards the screaming sound on the hill. It must have ran 100 feet in 7 seconds. I must tell you, there was a new moon that night, so it was pitch black out. When the thing was running, it broke sticks and branches and was very loud, almost running urgently and clumsily. At that point, it stopped completely by the screaming sound we heard seconds ago. My friend and I both sat there stunned in the canoe, our eyes looking toward the direction of where the running stopped. We sat there for almost an hour listening, but we only heard small twigs breaking, nothing else. We eventually left, but we both knew what it was. We are both in our mid-20s and are avid outdoorsmen and know whatever we heard was not a bear or a deer. Also noticed, a couple of years before, I was walking to the pond at night with my friend, and we stopped in the middle of the path to smoke a cigarette when we heard a thumping sound 40 feet into the woods, followed by a grunting elephant-type sound. The thumping sound was so intense that the ground beneath us shook. It did the sound 2 more times before we got out of there like a bat out of hell. The grunting sound was very intimidating. Also, I went to the same spot where we heard the running a few weeks later and went hiking. I found some interesting piles of rocks, and there were what looked like branches lined up and stacked against trees, making almost like a makeshift shelter or a crappy made teepee without the cloth outside. Other witnesses. There was one witness with me, and we both heard the same thing. We were just fishing and taking in the scenery. This occurred at about 8 or 9 at night. It was pitch black out. The weather was warm, and the sky was clear. The terrain is a thick forest with hills that can reach elevations of several hundred feet, with rivers and swamps and hiking trails. One can easily hike for miles without seeing a single cabin or house. Sounds good to me. Follow-up investigation report. Doesn't say by whom. I spoke with the person that submitted this report over the phone on 8/20/06. I also visited the location where the screams were heard with both witnesses on September 17th/06. I found both these individuals to be credible. Both are avid outdoorsmen and know their wildlife well and the sounds they can produce. They had the strong impression that the screams were from a young animal. This was followed by a larger adult crashing through the woods toward the source of the screams. The area in which the vocalizations were heard is mixed hardwood and coniferous forest with multiple rock outcrops and caves. There was an abundance of berry shrubs and a lake stocked with fish. About 2 miles from the location is a cornfield which bordered the forest. The witness and his friend were in an inlet close to shore when the screams were heard. He stated to me that he could not see the moon due to the tree line and hills. When he mentions pitch blackout, he's referring to the inlet and woodland interior. He was not absolutely sure what phase the moon was in. His guess was a new moon. There are only a few known wild species in North America that can make powerful screams, not howls, which might be mistaken for sasquatch screams: coyotes, barred owls, red foxes, bobcats, and mountain lions. The screams of Sasquatches often have a quality about them that suggests a large lung capacity and a cadence which sounds strangely ape-like. Outdoorsmen that are familiar with coyotes, barred owls, foxes, bobcats, etc., immediately hear the difference and pay attention, as they did in this case. So again, this one, they're not seeing anything. They're hearing a scream. It sounded like a mix between a young girl and a weird bird-like sound. There are a lot of animals in the woods that can make that sound: foxes and fisher cats and cougars, mountain lions, or a young bear even. This could have been a cub that was injured. And that's the thing too, like you have the animal's normal sounds, and then you have what an injured animal might sound like. So you have a bear cub that gets hurt and is screaming. It might not sound like a regular bear cub. It might sound ungodly and unearthly. And here comes mama bear, crashing through the woods. And I think it's harder to tell if something is bipedal when you're out on a lake and you're hearing these sounds far away. I tend to believe people who are like in a tent and something is walking around their tent, or in a campground and something is, 20, 30 feet away, versus you're out on a lake and there's something deep in the woods. I think it's harder to discern quadruped from biped at that point. I think when it's closer to you, if something's walking around your tent, if it's on 4 legs or 2 legs. So this one, I'm on the fence about, because these guys are a little older. They consider themselves avid outdoorsmen, versus the last story where it was like, yeah, I'm kind of an outdoorsman, but not really. And I think everything is due to Bigfoot anyway. So this one I'm a little bit more on the fence about. I'm not saying this wasn't Bigfoot. I'm just saying there's nothing here that convinces me that it was Bigfoot. My guess would be a bear cub that was injured and in distress and was screaming, and the mama bear is coming running for it. Again, if they had seen something, I don't know. Their other story about a few years ago where they heard a thumping sound in the woods and a grunting elephant and the ground was shaking. I don't know. That's that sounds a little bit more impressive than the main story they told, and I wish they had talked about that one more. But things in the woods can sound weird. you can have a squirrel or a chipmunk running through the leaf litter on the ground, and it can sound like a deer or a bear. It could sound like a big thing, because they run fast, and it could sound like something bigger. So you just got to be careful in the woods, especially when you're out on the water. Sound can bounce and sound amplified or just different. So I think this is a good cautionary story to tell, that you have an encounter. It's weird. Is it necessarily Bigfoot? I don't know. It could have been Bigfoot. It could be these guys just making up a story. It could be that they heard any number of other animals, known animals, that were just screaming and the mother's coming. I don't think it was a human. They would have seen a flashlight. I don't think a human can run through the woods on a dark night like that and not kill themselves. When you get out there and you see how dark the woods can actually be, if you're a city person like me, to go out into the woods where there is no light pollution, where there are no cabins, where there's no artificial light and there's no moon, you're not seeing anything, especially in the trees. So to me, this is probably a bear and a bear cub, but it's also possibly a Bigfoot. But Occam's razor and simplest explanation being the correct one usually, I'm going to go with a bear and a bear cub. But again, let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I'm always very curious to hear other opinions. All right, everybody, that's going to wrap up part 1 of Bigfoot encounters in Sussex County here. Like I said, we are going back to the Ren Faire soon in Sparta, New Jersey. So I will probably do a part 2 here because there's a lot of other cool stories from Sussex County that I want to talk about. But I picked these 5 just because of the most recent, and I felt it was a good mix of like really, obvious sightings versus just hearing some screams and some sounds in the woods that could have been literally anything. So I thought it was a good way to kind of balance the episode with some clear sightings versus some more ambiguous encounters. So yeah, if you guys have anything that you want to talk about, UFOs, ghosts, anything strange or spooky or weird that happened to you, Bigfoot, I love Bigfoot stuff, clearly, shoot me an email, jason@oddandountold.com, and we can have you on the show, or I can just tell your story on the show. But in the meantime, everybody, question everything. Like I mentioned earlier, we have to question these things. And questioning, as I always say, does not mean doubting. It's just you had an experience or this person had an experience. We need to question it. We need to understand it better because we weren't there. So we have to ask these questions. We have to say, could it have been a bear? Could it have been an owl? Could it have been an airplane? Could it have been something else? We need to question these things just to get to the truth. It doesn't mean we're doubting the witness. It just means we have to really do our due diligence here to make sure every possible explanation has been ruled out before we say it's Bigfoot or it's a ghost or it's a UFO. So question everything, everybody. And we will see you next week. On to the Ren Faire. Huzzah. Rock and roll.